If you grew up in a Christian home, there were meals you ate without recipes, without choices, and without anyone explaining why they mattered. They just showed up, and supper happened. In this video, we are counting down 25 survival meals Christian grandparents depended on during tight seasons. These meals were cheap, reliable, and repeated often, not because they were exciting, but because they worked. Some of these dishes are still loved. Some are nearly forgotten. A few sound strange until you understand why they existed at all. This is not about recipes. It is about how food quietly held families together. Let's begin with number 25. Number 25, beans and cornbread. In a lot of homes, beans were not a side dish. They were the plan, the anchor, the thing you could count on when the week had already taken its share. A pot sat on the stove like it belonged there, bubbling slow, thickening as the hours passed. Onions went in first, their smell spreading through the house like an announcement. If a scrap of ham appeared, it was dropped in with care, as though it deserved a moment of respect. If not, the beans carried the whole job anyway, steady and forgiving. Then the cornbread came out, golden and steaming, and the kitchen softened around. Some people crumbled it into the bowl until it turned into a humble kind of feast. A spoonful could quiet the nervous edge in your chest, not because life suddenly got easy, but because you were fed and you were together. Number 24, fried potatoes and onions. Fried potatoes with onions could pull a whole house toward the kitchen without anyone calling. The pan hissed, the air filled up fast, and suddenly the day did not feel quite as heavy. Potatoes browned at the edges, onions melted into sweetness, sharp and gentle at the same time. Even a simple sprinkle of salt could make it feel like a real meal, the kind that showed up right on time. Sometimes bacon joined the skillet, and people smiled like they had been given a small gift. Other nights it was only potatoes and onions, and that was still enough. The sound of a spatula scraping old cast iron had a steady rhythm, like care turning into supper, one turn at a time. Number 23. Rice and gravy. Rice and gravy was a quiet kind of rescue. Rice stretched small into full, softening into a bed for whatever comfort could be made that night. Gravy did the heavy lifting. Sometimes it began with drippings saved in a jar. Sometimes it began with flour browned until it smelled deep and nutty. Someone stood over it and stirred with attention, scraping the corners like they mattered. When the gravy hit the rice, plain turned into rich. A few tiny bits of meat could make the bowl feel complete. People ate slowly, letting warmth settle into them, and the table felt steadier than it had all day. Number 22, biscuits and gravy. Biscuits and gravy carried the comfort of a full kitchen, even when the ingredients were simple: flour, a little fat, a hot oven, and hands that knew what they were doing. Biscuits rose into soft, steamy pillows that fogged the window glass and made the room smell like something safe. Gravy came from whatever the pan could offer: drippings when there were drippings, flour and milk when there were not, pepper shaken in with confidence, the kind that comes from repetition. If sausage showed up, it felt like a small celebration, though nobody called it that. This meal often arrived when everyone was tired but still wanted to sit down together. Plates passed, chairs scooted. Someone reminded the kids to say grace. The first bite tasted like warmth and quiet satisfaction, like ordinary things could still feel abundant. And for a few minutes, the day stopped demanding so much. Number 21, tuna noodle casserole. Tuna noodle casserole was proof that one can could become a plan. Noodles boiled up soft, tuna mixed in, and something creamy to bind it all together. Whether it came from a can or from a sauce, stirred slowly on the stove. Then came the topping, crushed crackers or crumbs, a browned blanket that made the dish feel finished. When the casserole came out of the oven, the smell filled the house with salt and warmth, the kind that made people wander into the kitchen and ask how long until it was ready. Kids either loved it or claimed they did not. even while taking seconds. Adults looked relieved because it fed everyone without costing much, and it stayed good the next day, which mattered when time and money were both thin. And it was not only family food. A dish like this traveled. It showed up at sickbeds, at mourning houses, at church kitchens, carried in two hands like care made visible. Number 20, pancakes for dinner. Pancakes for dinner felt like a small kindness slipped into an ordinary night. Batter stirred fast, skillet warming. The first pancake coming out, uneven the way it always did. Butter melted into the top. Syrup, when it was around, made the room feel brighter. When it was not, sugar and butter still turned it sweet enough to feel like a break. Forks scraped plates. Someone laughed at something small. It was not a grand moment, but it was a gentle one, the kind that made a hard day end a little softer. Number 19, buttered noodles. Buttered noodles were simple on purpose. Noodles boiled, drained, and tossed with butter until they shined. Salt, maybe pepper, maybe nothing more. For a child, it tasted like calm. For an adult, it tasted like a break. It was the meal that arrived when the pantry needed mercy, and nobody had energy for anything complicated. It stretched far, too. A small pot could feed a whole table, and leftovers did not cause trouble the next day. Quiet food, honest food, the kind that let a house settle down. Meals like this were so normal at the time that most kids never thought to question them. You just ate, got up, and went on with your night. It was only years later that many people realized how much those ordinary dinners were holding together. Number 18, peanut butter bread. Peanut butter bread showed up when the kitchen needed something fast that still felt like care. Bread on a plate, peanut butter spread thick, edge to edge, no fancy talk. It stuck to your mouth and demanded a drink, so a glass of water or milk often appeared beside it. Someone might cut it neatly, trying to make it feel like a treat, even when it was simply what could be offered. A quick prayer often came first, not because the meal was impressive, but because gratitude did not wait for abundance. The taste was simple, but the memory carries more than flavor. Number 17, cabbage and bacon. Cabbage and bacon could make the whole house smell like supper, even when there was not much to eat. Cabbage went into the pot chopped rough and cooked down fast, turning soft and silky, filling the air with something honest. Bacon might come next. Sometimes it was only a few pieces. Sometimes it was only the grease saved in a tin by the stove. Either way, that smoky richness changed everything. It made cabbage feel like it belonged at the center of the table, not pushed to the side. People ate it with bread, with potatoes, with anything that could soak up the juices. The meal looked humble, but it felt complete. There was a sort of peace that came from a hot pot and a full bowl, the kind that did not need to be explained. You could hear the lid clink, smell the steam, and watch someone dip bread into the broth without wasting a drop. Supper like that was not flashy, but it was faithful. Number 16, hot dog potato skillet. A hot dog potato skillet was what happened when you needed something quick, filling, and friendly to a tight budget. Potatoes were diced and tossed into a pan until they started to crisp. Hot dogs were sliced into coins and browned at the edges. The sound was half the charm. That steady crackle made the kitchen feel like it had momentum. The smell was sharp and salty, and it pulled people in from the living room without any announcement. Kids liked it because it looked like a real meal, not a sad one. Adults liked it because it fed everyone and did not require a lot of energy. A squirt of ketchup, a shake of seasoning, whatever was left in the cabinet could make it feel finished. This was the kind of supper that showed up on busy nights, between homework and church events and early mornings. Not perfect, not proud, just effective. And when it hit the table, nobody stayed hungry, which was the real victory. Number 15, ramen with egg. A packet of noodles could sit in the pantry for a long time, waiting for the day it was needed. The broth was salty and quick, a kind of comfort that arrived fast. But the egg changed the whole story. Crack it into the steam and watch it swirl. The yolk turned the broth richer. The whites softened into ribbons. Suddenly, the bowl felt sturdier, like it had real strength in it. It was a small upgrade, but it carried meaning. Someone cared enough to make the simple thing better. This meal often showed up when people were tired and still had mouths to feed. The kitchen light was dim, the house quiet, the bowl warm between your hands. It was not about impressing anyone. It was about making it through the night with something hot inside you. Restaurants may dress noodles up and charge for the spectacle, but the heart of the meal is still the same. Warm broth, soft noodles, an egg dropped in like a promise. Number 14, creamed something on toast. Creamed something on toast belonged to the era of making do without making a show of it. A pale, thick sauce came together with flour and milk when there was milk, and came together anyway when there was. Bits of meat might be stirred in, chopped small so they felt like more. Then it all went over toast until the bread softened and a fork became necessary. Some people loved it. Some people endured it. Everyone got fed. It was warm, peppery, steady, a meal that did not pretend to be anything else, and somehow that honesty made it memorable. Number 13, cornmeal mush. Cornmeal mush asked for very little and still managed to feel like supper. Cornmeal and water cooked slowly until thick, turning into a golden mound that could be eaten warm or cooled and sliced. Fried slices were the version kids hoped for, crisp at the edges, soft in the middle. Syrup made it feel special. When syrup did not show up, butter and salt still carried it. The texture stayed with you, smooth or gritty, depending on who stirred the pot and how patient they were. Steam in the kitchen, spoon scraping the bottom, simple food doing its quiet work. Number 12, milk toast. Milk toast sounds like something you would only eat when options ran out. Yet, for many households, it was oddly soothing. Bread toasted or warmed, broken into pieces, then covered with warm milk until the edges softened and the center held. Sometimes sugar was sprinkled on top, sometimes only a pinch of salt. It was not loud food. It did not fill the house with a dramatic smell. It was gentle, like a meal made for tired evenings and quiet stomachs. It appeared in sick rooms and on nights when the house needed to settle down. A bowl placed carefully on the table, a spoon set beside it, a soft reminder not to rush. The warmth moved slowly through you, and it felt like being cared for without a lot of words. Comfort is often described as something rich and heavy. Milk toast was comfort in a softer key. It did not try to impress. It tried to soothe, and sometimes that was exactly what people needed. Number 11, garden greens and vinegar. Sometimes the cheapest supper was barely a supper by modern standards, but it still mattered. Garden greens and vinegar was sharp and fresh, served when the pantry was low but the yard still gave. Greens were washed, chopped, and dressed with vinegar. A little sugar might soften the bite. A pinch of salt might be all there was. It woke your mouth up and made you sit up straighter, like the taste itself carried a small jolt of strength. A garden was not a hobby in those homes. It was quiet insurance. When money tightened, the backyard still offered something. Hands pulled leaves. A bowl was filled. Supper arrived with sunlight still clinging to it. The vinegar was not about fancy flavor. It was about making something simple feel alive. A sharp taste can remind you that you are still here, still going, still able to make a meal out of what the day provided. And there was pride in that, even when nobody said the word out loud. Number 10, egg on anything. One egg could change the mood of a plate. It could turn rice into supper, noodles into strength, toast into something that looked complete. Eggs were not rare everywhere, but they were respected because they were useful. Crack one into a pan. The smell filled the kitchen like a promise. The edges crisped. The yolk ran golden. Suddenly, the meal looked finished, like it could hold you steady. For kids, it was comforting. For adults, it was practical. A small addition that stretched what was already there. The kind of choice that made a thin pantry feel less thin. There is a particular satisfaction in a simple upgrade. Not a big change, not a show, just a quiet improvement. Watching an egg set in a skillet, hearing the gentle sizzle, seeing the yolk shine. It felt like a bit of order returning. People talk about nourishment with complicated words now. In those kitchens, nourishment looked like one egg placed carefully on top of whatever was waiting. Number 9, soup beans with a side of quiet. Some meals were not only about filling your stomach, they were about settling the whole house. Soup beans simmered all day, and the smell stayed in the air like a blanket laid gently over everything. Someone stirred the pot. Between chores, someone checked the stove before sitting down. By the time supper came, the table did not need much conversation to feel full. There was a quiet that felt almost sacred, not empty silence, but the kind that says, the house is holding together. Grace was often spoken the same way every time, not dramatic, just the routine itself was comforting. Beans again, yes, but also warmth again, together again, safe again for one more night. The sound of spoons against bowls became its own kind of music. A chair scooted, a cup set down. A child asked for more cornbread. The house exhaled. Memory lives in those small sounds, not in grand speeches, but in a room that felt calm because supper was there doing its quiet work. Number 8, cabbage soup that fed everybody. Cabbage soup was the kind of meal that could feed a family and still leave enough for tomorrow. Cabbage cooked down, broth took on its flavor, and whatever else was available joined in without needing an invitation. Carrots when they were around, potatoes when they could be spared, beans when the pantry offered them. The soup was never exactly the same, and that was part of its strength. It adjusted to the week. It forgave what was missing. A pot of soup made a house feel cared for. It also made the kitchen feel alive. Steam rose. Lids clinked. Someone tasted the broth and added salt with a careful hand. Bread was sliced so it could be dipped into the bowl. This kind of food did not ask for perfection. It kept providing. People talk about simple living now like it is a choice. But in those houses, simplicity was often necessity, made gentle by warmth and habit. Walk into a home where cabbage soup is simmering and you can feel the welcome before anyone says a word. Number 7, church basement chili. Some of the best survival meals were not made for one family. They were made for everybody. Church basement chili appeared in big pots. When people had needs, they did not always speak out loud. The room might have folding tables and mismatched utensils, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, voices murmuring like a soft hymn. Someone poured in beans and tomatoes, maybe a little meat if it could be spared. Spices went in measured by memory, not by spoons. It was never exactly the same, because it depended on what people brought. Still, it was always warm, always generous. Eating in a room full of familiar faces made plain food feel rich. A bowl in your hands, a chair pulled out for you, someone asking how you are doing and meaning. Faith often looks like small actions repeated. A ladle, a smile, a second helping offered without questions. People might not remember the exact taste, but they remember the feeling of being included, fed, and seen. That is a kind of comfort no grocery store can sell. Number 6, bread and butter with something sweet. Bread and butter was the foundation on nights when the kitchen did not offer much else. Add something sweet, and it became a small kindness you could taste. Jam might appear in a thin layer. Honey might be drizzled carefully. Sometimes it was only sugar sprinkled on top, sparkling. Someone decided the day deserved a softer ending. A grandparent might spread the butter all the way to the edges and hand a child the slice with the sweetest corner. Little gestures like that mattered, not because the food was grand, but because the care was. Number 5, hard bread soaked in coffee or broth. Hard bread soaked in coffee or broth sounds strange until you picture the alternative. A heel of bread that had gone stiff was not thrown away. It was given one more chance. Coffee warmed it in the morning, softening it enough to chew. Broth did the same when something savory was needed. The bowl was humble, but the purpose was clear. In those kitchens, waste carried weight. Stale bread stayed food until it truly could not. Bread torn, liquid pour, a spoon stirring until it softened. Quiet. Practical, steady. One more. Night made manageable. Number 4, potato soup. Potato soup could look plain in the pot, yet it rarely felt plain in the bowl. Someone peeled potatoes by the window, the light catching the wet shine of each slice as it hit the cutting board. Onions went in next, and the smell alone made the room feel warmer than it was. Milk, when it was available, turned the broth pale and gentle. When it was not, the soup still worked. Salt, pepper, maybe a little grease from yesterday's pan, enough to make it taste like care. You could hear spoons tapping against bowls, a small sound that meant people were eating and not complaining. That mattered. A lesson lived inside meals like this without anyone turning it into a speech. Use what you have. Do not waste. Share what you can. A pot of potato soup often simmered slowly, as though it knew it had time. The steam fogged the air, and the kitchen smelled like simplicity made kind. Keep this one in mind, because potatoes had more than one story in those homes. Number 3, potato peels and waste-nothing soup. This is where the list stops feeling charming and starts feeling honest. Potato peels and waste-nothing soup came from a mindset that refused to throw away anything that could still help. Peels, onion ends, tired vegetables that did not look pretty anymore, all of it went into the pot. The broth turned thin and practical, tasting like the leftovers of the week. Some people added flour to thicken it. Some added a spoonful of fat to give it body. Often it stayed light, but it stayed hot, and heat mattered. There is a difference between a meal you choose and a meal you need. This one belonged to the second category. It was the tougher cousin of potatoes, the version made when the kitchen was almost out of options. And yet, it was served without theater. No shame, no apology, just a bowl placed in front of you like any other. In a house shaped by faith, feeding a family was an act of love. Even when the pot was mostly scraps. It is easy to toss peels now without thinking. In those kitchens, peels were tomorrow, and tomorrow was worth protecting. Number 2, liver and onions. Liver and onions is the meal that splits childhood memories into 2 piles, the ones you loved and the ones you endured. The smell could be strong. The texture was different from anything else on the plate. Some kids tried bargaining with their eyes before they eat. Liver was cheap and full of what the body needed. And for people who had seen what hunger could do, that mattered more than preferences. Onions were cooked down until sweet. Their softness meant to soften the sharpness of the meat. Potatoes or bread helped too, the way a steady side can help you get through a difficult mouthful. This meal often arrived with a familiar reminder to be thankful, not always as a scold, sometimes as a simple statement of reality. Food was not guaranteed. Complaining did not create more of it. So you ate what was served, and you learned something about endurance. Years later, some people taste liver again and understand the wisdom behind it. Not because it suddenly becomes their favorite, but because it tells the truth. It says, we did what we had to do, and we kept going. Number 1, water pie. Water pie is one of those desserts that sounds like somebody made it up to tease you. But it was real. A pie shell, sugar, flour, butter when it could be spared, and water. That was the list. The oven did the rest. The filling set up soft and sweet, not rich like custard, but comforting in its own quiet way. The purpose was never to impress. The purpose was to offer children a slice of normal when normal was hard to afford. A dessert that let a family pretend, just for an evening, that things were not so tight. Some people felt a strange embarrassment about loving it, as though admitting it tasted good meant admitting how little there was. Yet, the memory remains because someone tried. Someone chose joy even when the pantry was thin. Someone wanted the table to feel kind. That is why water pie lingers in stories. Not as a culinary masterpiece, but as evidence of love with limited ingredients. A small sweetness made on purpose, in a quiet kitchen, by a hand that refused to let hardship take everything. These meals were simple, but they were never empty. They carried the sounds of a kitchen settling down, the smell of onions meeting heat, the comfort of knowing supper would show up even when the week felt heavy. In homes shaped by faith, the lesson was not only how to stretch food, but how to stretch hope, patience, and care for one another. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Which one did your family lean on the most? And what is the smell you remember most from that era? One that takes you back instantly. If this kind of time travel feels like home to you, you belong here. Subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. We are stepping into a different kind of memory next time, looking at 1980s Christian things that are not socially acceptable today, and the stories behind why they disappeared.